So here I'm reading parts of three articles from this 1736 newspaper titled the Virginia Gazette. And I think all three are kind of connected. And it shows how far back this Jewish conspiracy goes. So on the left is an article about the King Theodore of Corsica. Now, on the right, you can see a prior video I did on the King Theodore, who I believe was probably a Jew because he knew the Kabbalah, and the Kabbalah is Jewish. And he was a revolutionary and a murderer, and used foreigners to take over Corsica. So, I mean, that's the MO of the Jews. So, So the article on the left says the rebels have hanged, murdered at Tamagan one imperial and his nephew for holding correspondence with the Genoese. Now, right now, the Genoese were the ones who controlled Corsica. The rebels were not Corsicans, but foreigners under King Theodore. Or I mean, he proclaimed himself king, but under this guy Theodore, who was actually German. He was also not a Corsican. They have also executed three more beyond the mountains on the same account, Luvione, Oreza, and Oriani, besides one called Saladea of the family of Coney for attempting to deliver up Porto Vecchio to the Republic, right, the Republic of Genoa. And at Bologna, they imprisoned six others under suspicion. They are baking as much bread and biscuit as will last 8 days for the succors which they daily expect. Their principal strength lies on the side of Saint Fiorenzo. They give they give out that the king will soon hold a grand council, either at Nebbio or Bologna. Several billets were found dispersed whereby all persons taking arms against the Corsicans. Now, it's actually the Corsicans taking arms against these foreign rebels, but those who control the Corsican government, King Theodore, calling themselves Corsicans, and the Corsicans who take up arms are now the rebels. See how they invert everything? That's what the Jews do all the time. So all persons taking up arms against the Corsicans, i.e., the foreign rebels, are threatened with death, confiscation of goods, and the utter destruction of their families. Their King Theodore has erected a mint to coin money since he wants neither gold or copper. Sounds like something a Jew would do, right? They want money right away. So here's a second article, and it's about who's this guy? Uh, uh, Karl Heinrich von, I think. Oh, Karl Heinrich de Hoym. So it says, advices from Dresden inform us that on the 12th of April, about 11 in the forenoon, the Count de Hoym was found hanged in his chamber at the castle of Königstein. This unfortunate gentleman, who has one of the finest houses in that city, has for some time past appeared very melancholy to find himself a prisoner for life. And it was remarked that he spent all that morning in fervent prayer to God. As he had been a minister of the cabinet council to the Count of Saxony. Some are ready to impute his despair to the apprehending of his secretary at the fair of Frankfurt on the Main. Hmm, who lives there? The Rothschilds and a lot of Jews. I wonder what his secretary was doing there. Who is privy to his correspondence with France? Hmm, why was this guy corresponding with France? Preparations are making for, or well, whatever, it doesn't matter. So anyway, Um, so this guy, Count de Hoym, says had many enemies, both domestic and external. Brought him into disfavor. In 1731, he was imprisoned on various charges, including disloyalty, but he was not found guilty. In 1734, he was another charge was brought up against him. He was charged with impregnating his own niece, but he was released and it doesn't say whether or not he was innocent or not. It just says he was released because Prince helped him. So if that's true, that's pretty messed up and disgusting. but we don't know if it is or not. And then it says he was arrested a third time on a charge of treason, right? Again, 1731 and then 1736. And that time he was found guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison. So, and his property was confiscated. And it claims that when his property was confiscated, they found a Theophrastus redivivus. Sorry if I don't know how to pronounce that. And it's a 17th century, right? 1600s. So it was already an old book by the time this guy was alive. Anti-religious, right? Anti-Christian text. And but it says that if there was a doubt as to whether or not he actually owned it, or was it, you know, attributed to him, or did somebody claim that he had it, but he didn't really have it? Who knows? But that's interesting. And this book, Theophrastus Redivivus, is anonymous, right? And it was anti-Christian, and it was about it was against religion and belief in God, and an anthology of free thought. Who pushes that? Jews. And who was pushing anti-Christian ideologies starting in the Renaissance and Enlightenment? Jews. So that's very interesting. On the left, you can, well, so on the right bottom there, that's a picture of this Count de Hoym. So it says he was praying to God and he was supposedly a good guy, but then maybe he was a bad guy and he was a traitor to Germany because he was working with France. Maybe he was working with the Jews. That's why his secretary was in Frankfurt on the Main. Who really knows? But that's him, and you can see the picture of him. I mean, does he look? Could he be Jewish? I don't know, right? Because I've done other videos on the subversion of the European nobility, and the Jewish subversion goes way back, unfortunately. So on the left there, it says you can read about the that book that I mentioned, and then it says Jewish involvement in Enlightenment thought. And it says many Jewish intellectuals in 18th century Europe were heavily involved in Enlightenment ideas. Well, my note right off the bat, then you know the Enlightenment ideas probably aren't good because any Jewish thought is bad and anti-Christian. So it's not natural for whites to think the way Jews think, but they input, or I don't know what the word is, but they stick in their thought and then they make it out as if it's our thought and it corrupts our thought. So they've been doing it for centuries or millennia. So it says figures such as Moses Mendelssohn were central to the Jewish Enlightenment called the Haskalah. I never heard of such a thing. I didn't know there was a Jewish Enlightenment, but apparently there was a Jewish Enlightenment at the same time there was a regular Enlightenment. So whose Enlightenment do you think it was, being that it was anti-Christian? So, or at least to set the foundation for later anti-Christianness. So, it says the role of Jewish writers in satirical works. Um, it says that they may, like this one book that I mentioned here, may have been written by Jews who were critiquing not only a larger society but also the religious and social structures within their own communities. Um, then they were, yeah, critiquing dominant cultures in Europe, which is what, white Christianity. So yeah, I can guarantee you the Jews were behind the corruptness of the Enlightenment. So, which I'm hoping eventually to get a video done on that. So here's the third article, sorry, and it kind of links to the other two. It says private letters from Paris mention that Madame Sallee, the famous dancer, what kind of dancer was she? So well known for the coolness of her passions and who value herself at a very high rate, right? I guess if she loved herself, I don't know, for her vestal pretenses, has instituted an order at Paris by the name of the Indifferents. So basically, she created a secret society, or maybe what guy was behind her, into which both men and women are indiscriminately admitted. Mademoiselle Sallee is the president of the order, and upon the introduction of every member, makes a nice scrutiny into their qualifications. There are likewise certain rites performed, which, after the manner of the Freemasons, no one must ever disclose. The badge of the order is a ribbon striped black, white, and yellow, and the device affixed to it something resembling an icicle. Hmm, I don't know what that means. They take an oath to fight against love. Okay, whose power they renounce, and defy his whole quiver of darts. They allow all freedom amongst themselves, where everything is to be in common. How the hour, but the hour of the part, but the hour the parties grow particular, he or she is to be excluded with infamy. So think about that. They allow all freedom amongst themselves, where everything is to be in common. Hmm, what does that sound like? Oh, I know. Jewish communism, Jewish Bolshevism, right? What was one of the claims that the Bolshevik Jews were trying to do? That they were trying to make women a common ownership among, in Russia, probably just among Jews, because I don't think Russian Christians would have done that. And obviously they're talking about, I believe here, orgies and basically just debased sexual activity, right? And who usually conducts that and pushes that? Jews. So was Madame Sallee probably a Jew? I bet she was, but I couldn't find too much about her. Um, so over on the right there, from the digital Jew, the Chat GPT, it says, as with Madame Sally's rejection of romantic love and social conventions, these Jewish writers may have been rebelling against the restrictive norms of their time, whether those norms were religious, social, or political. Of course, they were revolutionaries, because that's all Jews are. They try to upend everything that's good in the world, everything that white Christians have created. This rebellion often took the form of satirical literature or philosophical works aimed at questioning the status quo. Madame Sallee and the Jewish Connection. There is no clear direct evidence that she was Jewish. However, if she was part of a cultural or intellectual movement that involved these kinds of rebellious ideas, there could be an indirect connection, or direct, between the themes of Theophrastus Redivivus and the anti-establishment stance she embodied through creation of the Order of Indifference. In essence, the Jewish Enlightenment thinkers were often pioneering in their critiques of society, really subverting society, much like the Order of the Indifferents, right, which was subverting society. Um, Both share a common intellectual thread in challenging the norms of their time. While the Jewish Enlightenment, Haskalah, was a crucial component of the broader European Enlightenment. I have literally never heard of that. And it says here a crucial component of the broader European Enlightenment. I think that the Enlightenment was just the Jewish Enlightenment. um, of course, it denies it here. It says Jewish thinkers certainly contributed significantly to the Enlightenment movement by pushing for reason, modernity, and social change, right? Well, communism, anti Christianism. Um, so, anyway, very interesting. And I got to look more into the Scala. I don't know if anybody has any books or anything on that, but post them in the comments if you do. But that's ridiculous. So, like I said, makes me believe that the Enlightenment was just Jewish. So, anyway, I think that's all I have here. Yep.